Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the November 19th meeting of the Milford Planning and Zoning Board. I would ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May I have a roll call from the left?
Ryan Collegian.
Nancy Austin.
John Grant.
Carl S. Moore. Scott Marlowe.
Tom Panzella.
Jim Cater.
Peggy Cooney.
Bob Sadie.
And I'm Jim Quish, and we have Meg Green and David Sulkus with us to represent the staff. Our first order of business is 528 Wheelers Farm Road, Zone DO 25, petition of John Wicko for an amendment to a special permit with site plan review for redevelopment of vocational educational building on map 104, block 915, parcel 13, of which Boys and Girls Village, Inc. is the owner.
Good evening. Technical difficulties.
This is your password. Oh,
Yeah. Beautiful.
All right. Okay. Just need to do that little application. This right here. Just
No, we
double click
had
that.
I think we had to go in.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. We are taking some new technology out for a test ride.
Okay. Good evening. I'm John Wicko, architect at 58 Prospect Street, here to...
Excuse me, John, would you
Yes.
make sure you speak right into the mic?
Okay. Here with Boys and Girls Village. In the audience is the Director of Facilities from Boys and Girls Village, if we have any questions or need some information from them. Here for the Vocational Education Center. It was, which as you see on the board there, location is at the old temporary classrooms that were approved and built some years ago with a public hearing. The old classrooms are 4,085 square feet, and the proposed building, which you saw in the rendering, is 4,577. Roughly the same footprint, designed for the same space, with the utilities and all the hookups being reused from the previous building, which was a temporary building. What the first thing we need to do, I believe, is establish that this is a minor amendment to the special permit. Per section 7210, staff wanted me to run that by you to make sure that you're okay with this site plan review as a regular meeting, not a public hearing. The fact that we have the building of the same nature for the same overall use as the Boys and Girls Village is still doing. It's an expansion of the services that they provide already, but in a permanent basis. So I could continue with the presentation to further explain that it's similar enough to become a minor amendment, or if you want to decide at this point that it is a minor amendment to the special permit, and we can proceed in that fashion. So it's up to you. Maybe David has some comments on that as well.
I would then defer to David to see what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are, well, based on other amendments to their special permit and site plan that were done in the past, they were, for the most part, all done as minor amendments, which didn't require a public hearing. So my recommendation, if you're asking for me, for that, would be to continue tonight in the format that we have. But the board can, if it so determines, say that, well, gee, based on the fact that it was a special permit originally with a site plan review, that you can call for a public hearing. It's up to you.
At this point, I would ask the board for questions or comments. Anything from anybody? Okay, so this is, I guess, at our discretion, and we can entertain a motion. We can have a motion on these. No one seemed to desire a public hearing, and if there's no questions or comments on the application, then we can have a motion.
Two issues.
Yeah.
Are you making a motion to decide whether or not this is a minor amendment or a major amendment? And that's question one. And then after you get the presentation, then you can do a motion on that. Keep in mind, if you rule that this is a major amendment that requires a public hearing, then the proceedings for this item will stop this evening, because then it'll have to be noticed and be heard at a future date.
All right, thank you for the clarification. So we will take a motion on whether or not to have a public hearing. A motion in the affirmative would be most appropriate, and if it's not passed in the affirmative, then we can hear the presentation. Is that your understanding?
I would suggest doing a very simple motion for or against this being a minor amendment. If everyone agrees it's a minor amendment, then you will continue tonight. If the motion for this being a minor amendment fails, then it'll be a major amendment, which would be a future public hearing.
So then the motion would be to consider this a minor amendment, if someone would make that motion. Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion that, based on the presentation, that this would be considered a minor amendment and that we continue with the process.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Austin. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I would hear a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you for that motion to continue. So as I mentioned, it's a vocational education building. There's a statement of purpose in your file which describes the overall Boys and Girls Village program and what they do. And then towards the end of the letter, it does describe the vocational education building as being a training center to teach our at-risk students and clients necessary life skills and the vocational skills that help them become self-sufficient as they transition to early adulthood. The building will allow for small group instructions, peer modeling, hands-on experience to develop basic employment readiness skills, having a maximum of 20 students in the building at a time. The building is an offshoot of the upper school, which is their high school. So it's like another classroom for them. It's specialized, so we decided to devote the program to a single use building since it's so specific. The building is 4,577 square feet, and it's in the same location as mentioned before, the temporary school building, which was approved in between what is currently the soccer field practice ring and the existing driveway for the lower school. So it fits in the same footprint. It's no closer to the property lines than the temporary building was. It's slightly bigger, just because of more program that we're trying to accommodate in a more comfortable fashion. The site plan itself is pretty straightforward since there was a building there already. The grading is straightforward. The contours are remaining natural, so there's no real disturbance to that. There is a driveway extension off the loop, which allows an overhead door, which you'll see in the elevations. It's for a drive-in, for automotive, for material deliveries, and to gain access to the shop area, which is at the rear of the building. There is landscaping that's proposed for the front, just simple shrubs and kind of foundation plantings. Since the site is developed already, we're not really trying to do too much there, even though we are providing a screen of evergreens between the building and the soccer field fence. The rest of this, let's see if there's anything else on the site. We are proposing some walkways to tie into the existing system of roads and paths throughout the campus. There are, on the next sheets, there's some details of the site conditions on SP2. And SP3 is our details also, but of the water infiltration system that we're proposing to install. I should point that out to you, I'm sorry. That's over in this area, which is a series of 30 some odd basins that are sunk in the ground to accept the storm water from the building roof, basically. It's piped over to that. So that was part of the engineering review, which we had no problems at all with. It was approved with the first pass. The health department also approved the building, since it's roughly the same building using the same students that was approved previously. So the existing septic tank and the leaching field that is on site is just being used as it was before. So that was approved. The other departments that were favorable were fire, wetlands, and building. And I'm not sure if we got any comments from Tree or the Director of Public Works yet, but typically they linger and will come in later. So back to the plans. The third plan in the site is related to the water infiltration system and the different processes and test pits and things that they did in determining the soil capacities and locations of it and the areas that were required. To move on to the building, the first floor, it's a one-story building. which faces the driveway. There's 3 different specialized classrooms for the various disciplines that they're going to be teaching. That's the front side of the building, and then there's a larger shop area, which is 4 feet lower to allow for the drive-in, which is over on the left there, the overhead door, which I described before at the site. There's also a kitchen, self-sufficient type kitchen to introduce the kids to daily activities and life skills. Just to go through, that's another plan, the larger plan showing dimensions, but the elevations are such on A2, where the lower elevation is the front elevation, which shows one of the classrooms as a vaulted space with a flat canopy at the entrance door with metal cladding. And then on the left of that front elevation is a lower section that houses the other 2 classrooms, and it is clad in a clapboard-style cementatious material. And you see the larger block behind it with the standing seam roof and also metal cladding, a little more of a high-tech, if you will, a little more progressive materials to reflect what's going on inside the building as well. The side elevation, which is towards the soccer field, shows the profile of the shop at the rear, and then the front classroom towards the front. Here is that overhead door in the side of the shop that is open to the driveway side of the site, the local driveway. And then the rear, which is towards the parkway, is a big blank metal wall, basically, for the shop area. And then we also include some building sections to give you a further description of the volumes that are inside and the roof lines. That is hopefully a pretty quick presentation to give you a good understanding of what the building is used for, how it was designed, and what it looks like, which I have this rendering here. And gives you a good perspective of how the massing and the different parts of the building interact to be an attractive addition to the school in the village. That is my presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, would you refresh our memory or explain to us why this is coming in front of us? Just sort of frame it for us, as well as give your perspective on the application. Thank you.
Sure, that's easy, because originally the board approved the temporary classrooms that are located there on the site now. And at the time that they were approved, the applicant said that they were temporary and they would be coming back with a new building at some point in the future. So that point in the future is tonight. So we're going from these temporary structures to permanent structures and all of those things that are related to permanent structures, like drainage, which is being included now on the site for those structures.
Great, thank you. And then and maybe an overview of the application for us. Thank you.
The applicant proposes to replace a temporary classroom building with a permanent vocational classroom space of 4,577 square feet. The application was processed in accordance with section 7.2.10 as amended to the special permit, as the new permanent building is approximately the same size as the temporary building that was approved by special permit. In accordance with section 7 to 10, and as such, the board may determine that the amendment is not subject to public hearing. You did that this evening. The new building is within the existing footprint of the temporary building site with added stormwater drainage being provided.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Wicko. Thank you for the presentation. From the farthest side of the room, it's hard to see what you have up on the screen, but I've been using Dropbox. I wasn't doing text messaging. I was looking at the materials that you had. But if you can answer one question for me, would you describe numerical figures, if you could, what is slightly bigger? I mean, is it 10,000 square feet? Is it 500 square feet?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure thing. The original building was 4,085, and the new building is 4,577. So about 500 square feet larger. You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right, seeing none, I would hear a motion. Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve as presented the petition of John Wicko for an amendment to a special permit with site plan review for redevelopment of vocational educational building on map 104, block 915, parcel 13, of which Boys and Girls Village, Inc. is the owner.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Austin? We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next order of business is a public hearing to be closed by December 24th, 2019. Vote by February 27th, 2020. Proposed change to the City of Milford zoning regulation petition by Kevin Kersadian for changes to Article 5, Sections 5.2.1, 5.2.5, 5.3.6, and 11.2 to allow electronic digital billboard signs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Kevin Kersadian. My office is at 3 Lafayette Street here in Milford. I am presenting this application on behalf of Mr. Dominic DiMartino, who couldn't be here tonight, but in his place we have Mr. David Gannon, a VP of Outfront Media. We have an expert witness who you're going to hear from, Mr. Cheng Sien, who came in here from Canada this evening, and also we have as a consultant on the project, Mr. Jim Amon, former Speaker of the House of the state of Connecticut and managing partner of IGS. So I just wanted to give a brief background, and we'll keep this as brief as possible. Some members of the board who have been on the board for a number of years may have seen this come up before. It's been percolating for about 5 years, 3 to 5 years off and on, and it's made its rounds. It's never actually this application's never actually, I don't think, made it as to a hearing. I think it might have made it on an agenda a couple of years ago. For a variety of reasons, it just never came before the board. About a year and a half ago, I started working on this, And we took the regulations that had been circulated and we revised those. There was numerous conversations with the Director of Permitting and Land Use and Mr. Sulcus. There was discussions back and forth, and there were a lot of people that had input into the regulations that are presented as part of this application this evening. There was, when I first was asked to take a look at these regulations and bring them forward to the board, I was of the mindset that there would be a simpler way to do it, which would be to basically grandfather in the existing billboards on I-95 that in certain locations and leave the regulation as that, which would have been a much shorter, simpler regulation. But it had already developed to a point with input from the city planner, Mr. Sulcus, and Director of Permitting and Land Use, Joe Griffith, that they had preferred and suggested a different way, and in retrospect, it probably makes more sense, where it's a more robust regulation that has created definitions that did not previously exist in the regulations. So as part of the zone text amendment, which this is, they have, in addition to changing some of the language of the existing regulation, there's also been numerous additions to the definitions. You know, for example, digital billboard wasn't defined. Billboard's not actually still defined in your regulations. So that's how the form of the regulation came into being as it's presented tonight. And also for the record, I wanted to let you know that there's certain statutory requirements when you have a regulation change. One of them is that a copy of the regulations be filed with the town clerk or the city clerk at least 10 days before the public hearing. The regulations were filed with the city clerk on October 16th of this year, so they've had those regulations. This was filed and almost came before the board last year. Since that time, there has not been a change or a substantial change to the regulations. There might have been some minor typographical errors corrected in the regulation. So that's what brings us to where we are tonight. I'll just run briefly through the locations and what we're asking the board to do, and we have our expert to talk about the technical pieces of it. These are the sections of the regulations that we're changing. 11.2 is the definitions section. We've added definitions, and you'll see that. I also have a couple of extra hard copies of the regulations. If you don't have them with you, I can pass those out. As the regulations are proposed to you tonight, and the materials I presented is the slideshow presentation and also a letter of support from a local business person that I'll go over in a minute. But what you're looking at, what I've handed to you is exactly what I have here up on the screen. So these are the existing billboard locations that would be impacted by this proposed reg change. So there's 7 locations. Some of them are double-faced, some of them are single-faced. We've tried to give as much information about the billboards as possible so you understand which billboards we're talking about. We're only talking about billboards in these zones. Only one it's in a CDD1, which is not a straight or a pure residential zone, but there is a residential aspect to that at West Avenue. There's a condo complex. These are an aerial view of the parcels. This is starting going west to east. So we start out in Warfield Street, Row Ave, up to 590 West Avenue, which is just past if you're familiar with the subway or was Bick Drive. The additional parcels going further northeast on 95, all of these, we tailored the regulations to only impact only certain zones and only particular billboards. 45 Banner Drive, which is my client's property, Mr. DiMartino. And then some Research Drive properties. And then we've highlighted each specific, we've blown up each parcel a little bit and tried to show the location of the existing billboard on site. Some views from, I think this was actually from last fall, these photographs, but they're the same locations. if anyone would like me to stop or slow down, I can have a specific question about one of the billboards. I'm more than happy to take the question. This is the West Avenue parcel. You can see there's a billboard to the left of the photograph. It's separated by, it's a City of Milford parcel, but then on the other side of that is I think it's Gloria Commons, a corner of Gloria Commons. There's also foliage in between the billboard and the residential area. This was as of in the past fall, digital billboards in neighboring towns or towns in the region on I-95. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen them, New Haven, down at West Haven. There's one in West Haven that came up last year, and then several in Bridgeport and Stratford. These are some of the digital billboards that exist in the region, also on I-95 in neighboring towns. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen those driving. This is just an example of a digital billboard that's near Webster Arena, and it's just a little discussion of the work that goes into it. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tien in a moment. Mr. Sulcus had provided an administrative summary about the light regulations, and I think one of them we corrected. It was an application for a permit would have to be certified by a light engineer was the revision, and I think that's been changed. If it's not, that there's no issue with changing that. As we've presented this as an as-of-right permit. That's what the way the regulation is written. There was also a lot of discussion, or some discussion, with staff about what public service announcements would be allowed for the city and the billboard owners. And it's my client, and it's my understanding the other billboard owners don't really have a problem with that, and they work together with municipalities and local nonprofits in order to offer something like that. We did not put that as specifically in the regulation because we're not able to figure out how that would work, and it wouldn't be either. How would you enforce that, and how would it be used or abused by one side or the other? So, in speaking with Mr. Gannon and my client as well, the suggestion was they've done that in other towns as a letter agreement between the parties, so that a town could have an opportunity for a public service announcement or a local event like Pumpkins on the Pier or Oyster Fest parking is moved to such and such location. So there would be that type of availability on these billboards. The other comment that I had heard is that, in speaking with Mr. Sulcus, is that we are disregarding the existing light regulations for the city. That's not accurate. We have changed the light regulations for these digital billboards with a different way of measuring, and our consultant or our expert will talk about that. But it just so happens we've had an analysis done by our expert, and he'll talk briefly about that we can meet the 0.1 foot candle regulation that's in existence right now on a residential property with the billboards and the way we have things proposed. So although the regulation is worded differently than what the current regulation requires as far as measuring light trespass onto a neighboring property, we can still meet the light trespass requirement onto the residential property as these digital billboards exist. The other point that you may hear is that we're proposing to change pre-existing non-conforming billboards or billboards that are in some way or not in compliance with the regulations. The proposal is for legal conforming and legal non-conforming. So if something's legally non-conforming, you don't lose that right to use it. And you can either get a legal non-conforming structure or use by either variance, or you can get one by having it in existence prior to the zoning regulation being adopted, which I think is probably, some of these signs are probably a mixture of those two things. So it's our position that the signs evolved over time. They went from paint to vinyl, and now this is the natural progression to the next medium of how the signs are presented. So it's not really a change of use, or you're not expanding a pre-existing non-conforming structure or use. It's the same use. It's a sign. Now it's just a digital sign. And I'll be followed by Mr. Sien, unless there's any questions for me.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sulkus,
I have a couple of questions.
proceed.
Mr. Crusaden, in the packet you just handed out, you show 0 Warfield Street and 270 Rowe Avenue. And according to your proposed location of where billboards would be, these are not adjacent to I-95. There's a railroad state property that runs between 95 and those billboards. So under the definition that you propose, number 2, which says, be erected as a ground sign located on the property, blah, 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 blah.
David, would you hit the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. So if you could just comment, you don't have to comment now, but it appears that those 2 signs at Warfield Street and Rowe Avenue wouldn't be allowed to be converted if this is approved because of where they're located. So that's question number 1. And then number 2 is more of an observation. You made the statement that the lighting levels for residential uses, you could meet those at the the 0.1, but you stayed silent about the 0.5 requirement that we currently have for commercial properties, which would abut these. So I'm assuming that you wouldn't be able to meet the 0.5?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. That's correct. The analysis was that we would not be able to meet the 0.5 commercial under the existing regs. We would still be able to meet the regulation that we're proposing, and we had a couple conversations about that the past few days. And the concern that I always heard from your office was, a residential abutter, or at least that's my recollection. And we don't really see it as a negative if we can't meet it for a commercial property, because either the commercial property is open at night or the commercial property is closed, and this is additional light or security for that commercial property. When you look at where these properties are located, they're in, basically industrial, most of them are industrial zones, and they're all adjacent or near I-95, and I'll look at your other question and see if I could give you an answer on that. So we don't really see that as a negative, not being able to meet the regulation as far as the commercial properties go. With respect to the question about I-95, we had worded it, and I'm just looking for the exact number that you were referencing, but it was I-95 road system or an access ramps or right-of-way with respect thereto, collectively the I-95 corridor. So If it's state DOT, and I'd have to check on that and see if we would need to revise the wording slightly if there was a railroad intervening between the parcels. But the intention was that we would, that it would encompass those billboards as well.
Any further questions on that issue? Is there any questions or comments at the board at this time, or should we let the applicant continue? Please continue.
Thanks.
Please state your name and address for the board. Thank
Sure.
you for the record.
Yeah. My name is Cheng Tian. My address is 2231 Lapsley Crescent in Oakville, Ontario. So I flew in this morning from Toronto. And thank you. I'm glad to be here. So today I wanted to kind of elaborate on my clients, the considerations with regards to lighting with this digital billboard proposal. So myself, my background, I have a Master's of Engineering from University of Toronto. I'm currently the head of product engineering with Media Resources. It's a digital display manufacturing company. As well, I am a resident light expert with probably about 11 years doing sort of lighting consulting work. So this is going to be relatively quick. I had a longer presentation that was about 30 slides, but it got very technical. I cut it down to about 8. So if there's any questions, we do have a lot more sort of appendices to support this. So the very core question here is we're trying to address light pollution. And what is light pollution? There's essentially 2 aspects here to consider. One is the aspect of glare, which you can see in this image here. And then there's the aspect of light trespass. And those are different because glare is something that comes from a high density sort of light source, which causes your eyes to have an adverse reaction. And light trespass is about inadvertent floodlighting of light into an area which it's not desired. And when it comes to these 2 different things, they're actually measured somewhat differently. So with glare, that is something called luminance, and we generally measure that with something called nits, or candelas per meter squared. You can think of it as sort of the surface density of a light-emitting surface. So, for example, this light down here that you see there it's a very small area, but it's a very dense source of light. The second aspect is light trespass, which is measured in illuminance. And the units of measure are foot candles, which we'll be talking about here, and is also referenced in the amended regulations and the existing regulations. And what illuminance is it's the amount of light that actually passes through an area. So you can, for example, this window, the amount of light that's actually kind of arriving at that window is measured in foot candles. And to give you a sense for what that experience is like, 1 foot candle is the light from one fire candle when experienced from 1 foot away. So when it comes to digital billboards, both things are kind of treated in the industry. So with regards to surface brightness, it's generally limited by DOTs and by a lot of sort of manufacturers to 300 nits, and that's kind of a locked sort of figure. And at 300 nits, it really avoids all issues with glare. And that's something that you can actually enforce, but the equipment is rather expensive. And the bad thing about enforcing that is it doesn't capture the light trespass or the illuminance issue at all. Another way, which in many ways is a better way, is to look at the illuminance, which is which the OAAA, Outdoor Advertising Association of America guidelines set a limit of 0.3 foot candles at 250 feet away for a 1448 size display, and that's what you'll see in the proposed amendment. And that 0.3 foot candles at 200 feet away it's an indirect way to arrive at the 300 nits. So the 2 are really the same thing. 300 nits, 300 nits display on a 1448 is the same as the 0.3 foot candles at 250 feet away. The benefit of that 0.3 foot candle measurement is that it can be made with a much easier to acquire, cheaper instrument, and it also represents the relevant light trespass, or the amount of light reaching an area where an observer, like a residential property, might be located. So very briefly, I just want to talk about illuminated signage types because what we're talking about, and to Mr. Kasadan's point, we're talking about sort of an evolution on an existing type of billboard, whereas currently the billboards in question are static uplit, which reflects light from a light source, a light fixture. There's LED digitals are actually emissive, they emit the actual light. Now I noted something interesting in the regulations there under 5.2.2.2 when it just talks about internally lighted signs, so basically backlit signs as being acceptable. And I wanted to make this point that from a lighting perspective, an emissive LED display, such as the one we're talking about for these digital billboards, is very similar to backlit signs. Neither of them have any hotspots that have in excess of a couple hundred nits. In the case of the digital billboard, 300 nits, and they do not have any directional projection of light, whereas your uplit static might have a very hot spot on the fixture and also direct the light upwards into the sky. So this is just a little brief comparison so when it came back to the regulations, and this is addressing Mr. Salkis's point, because we discussed this topic at length here about, how does this differ? How do the existing regulations on lighting and light fixtures and signs apply to digital billboards, and whether any special treatments have to be made? Well, and there's a very important qualitative difference. So with light fixtures, such as these street lamps, it's a very small area, about this big sometimes, roughly, but it can range from a surface luminance from 2,000 upwards of 10,000 nits. So it can create both a glare issue and that illumination issue, the light trespass issue. And so that's why you need to shield it carefully so that it doesn't, otherwise it's like high beams on the highway. In contrast, digital billboards are a larger area, but they're very low luminance. It's less than 300 nits, of course. And that doesn't cause glare, but it is capable of unwanted illumination, which is something we still have to address. So because of the significant qualitative differences between light fixtures and digital billboards, we think that the specific rules around light fixtures are not exactly valid, so we need to treat it a little bit differently. And we do need to treat the unwanted illumination by considering it and limiting it in some way. So this is just a little bit further on specifically the technology in digital displays today. All manufacturers will have ambient sensitive brightness controls, and that means that they dim down at night. When the sun comes up, they'll brighten up for the day. So it's like your mobile phones, that they run darker at night than in the day. And secondly, for many manufacturers, they have monitoring and logging capabilities. So because brightness is such an important issue, later on you can come back and look at exactly what the brightness was of a display 4 months, a year later, if something were to, some complaint were to come in or some concerns were floating around. So just in brief summary, again, this is the abbreviated version. One is that digital billboards, when they're running at the 300 nits standard in the industry, or equivalently the 0.3 foot candles at 250 feet as proposed by the amendment, that will not produce any glare in the same way that light fixtures do. And number two is we did run through all of the calculations and modeling on each and every one of those 7 sites, and can show that for residential property impact, it's limited to less than 0.1 foot candles. That's everything, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Thank you for the presentation. Oh, yes, Mr. Marlowe.
In reading through the regulations, I see that you're basing this on the ambient light at the time. So if at 250 feet, unless I'm misunderstanding, if there's additional lighting around, whether it's lights on the highway or lights, a street light or whatever, that now sets what the ambient light is, correct? So it can be 0.3 above that point, whatever the ambient light is. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's exactly correct. And to your point, this 0.3 above ambient means generally that it's not the only lighting in the area. So where these are placed, there's also street lighting and other sort of light features. And a typical highway light would probably cast down something in the range of 1 to 2 foot candles in terms of illumination on the ground. So this would be additive to that.
Right, I guess that was where I was going with that, is that depending on what the ambient light is at wherever you're taking that measurement, and when you take that ambient measurement, or however you want to term it, do you take like a 3 or 4 readings and take an average and say, okay, I took it on this side, and this is the average of the ambient light?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the typical procedure would be to go out and take the display, turn it to black, and take minimum of 5 readings of the location and capture the median for the reading. Then turn the board to its full power, or whatever the full configured power is for the nighttime, and take the same 5 readings, capture the median, and ensure that the difference between the board being on versus off is no more than 0.3 foot candles.
And then just one other thing, I saw, because the light emission is a huge concern for me. And I see that it says you're going to put a meter or something on the display itself that judges the ambient light there. And how does that work when you're judging it there, so it's telling the sign to do something, and then 250 feet away, it may not be the same ambient light, so I'm confused.
That's a great question. So this is a picture of the ambient light sensors. You can see the face of the displays there. So for one, it doesn't read back any of the light casted by the display itself, so it reads the ambient light. But this sensor basically will have, it's generally configured to detect nighttime, as opposed to, it's detecting the sun, not really other little things going on around it. And it hits its nighttime brightness by, I think when it hits about 100 foot candles or less, it starts to go into full nighttime mode, just to ensure there's no issue. And so whatever variations down on the ground from cars, other things in the range of point something or 1 or 2 foot candles are irrelevant to the sensor. We're already in the nighttime mode.
Okay, yeah, and understood. I guess some of these might be, like near factory or some warehouses or something where there may be lighting anyway on that, and will that affect the ambient light that the meter is sensing that tells the sign what to do?
Right. Generally, that's a very good question. Generally, your nighttime lighting would not exceed anything in the range of 5 or 6 foot candles. Anything beyond that is exceptionally bright. I mean, in here, we're less than 100 foot candles. So,
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Yes, David.
So would let me back up. So your proposal would allow changes in messages every 10 seconds, is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
Okay. Would different messages that have different colors throw off different amounts of light?
Yes, that's correct. So different copy can create a different amount of light that comes off. So we're talking about the maximum amount that can come from the display, which is, if it's all white, fully on, we're limited to that. And I think you're also kind of raising the question of the changing, illumination and what that effect might have on, people's perception. Content will generally range, because we look at this from a power consumption point of view all the time. Content will generally range from about 30 to 40% brightness to 100% brightness. Actually, more like 30, 40 to 80% brightness, and that's kind of the realistic range of power of light output.
So if you have a different message with a different advertisement every 10 seconds that could be a different brightness every 10 seconds, how is that not flashing? How is the human eye depict that as not being, ooh, a flash there, 10 seconds, ooh, a flash there, versus a steady 0.3, foot candles?
Yeah, that's a valid question. It's a good one. But there's many sources of light that do change dynamically. just because they're changing dynamically doesn't make them flashing. For example, if your car driving down the street, you flash your high beams, that's a sort of flashing. There's a rapid change in intensity, and it's a very large, magnitude and change. What we're talking about is something more like a car coming around a bend. The change is not so great, especially when there's other ambient light around. So for example, if your ambient light is already 2 foot candles, and we're adding on, let's say we're varying between an output of 0.1 to 0.2 foot candles, that really is basically taking like a 2.1 foot candle to 2.2 foot candle kind of change. Now, when it comes, if digital billboards hypothetically produce glare, that could be potentially a source of concern. But at the sort of luminances that they operate, the glare is not an issue. We also have a good, I think, sense of what digital billboards, like the highway digital billboards, look like when they change, and perceptually, I think we have a good feel for what that feels like, whether it's flashing or just changing.
But isn't that really dependent on the advertisement? Like you said, you have some advertisements that could have a very bright white background. You might have one that has a bright red background. And I'm guessing that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you're not analyzing each and every one of these advertisements for lighting. You're in the business of putting messages on billboards. Someone's going to design a graphic that's going to go on a billboard, whatever it is, and whatever the logo is for whatever it is. So potentially, you could have something that's very bright, changing to something else that's very bright, or a different color, or something that's darker. Again, might not be flashing, but every 10 seconds, there's a different amount of nits, or a different amount of foot candles that you're subjected to when you go down the road. So I'm just wondering, how do you account for those differences, other than in the laboratory where you're saying, oh, gee, yeah, okay, this is the levels that we like to see, but that message could be something totally different every 10 seconds.
Yes, that's actually, that's completely true. There's no way to govern what kind of content goes on or curate it or limit it in any specific way. However, again, it's important to note that we're talking about low levels here, and it's the difference between, 0.03 foot candles and 0.08 foot candles, because we're basically talking about something that can at most produce 0.1 foot candles on any residential property. So it's limited in magnitude is kind of the answer.
Thank you. How often does the image change?
Every 10 seconds, and that's kind of it's in the proposal as well.
And so the analytics that you put forth is primarily the brightest potential image, and if I heard you correctly, some of the images would be at 30% of the brightest image, and the average would fall somewhere between the 30 and 80%. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments at this point? Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Of the number of 7, how many of them have existing lighting, and comparing the existing lighting to what you're proposing? Would you talk about that, please?
Yeah, to my understanding, all of the 7 sites have existing uplighting. And in comparison to digital billboard lighting, on the regular static billboards, there's a potential, it's unregulated, and there's a potential for it to be in excess of 300 nits, especially on certain hot spots, and especially on sort of the lenses around the light fixtures themselves. It could potentially have a very high sort of luminance on those select areas. It's at this time we don't know what the exact foot candle effect is out on the ground, but we think it's in the same order of magnitude as what we're proposing.
Thank you. Just to follow up, did I hear you say that you don't know what the existing lighting is? Is that you've not measured it yet?
Yeah, we haven't measured the existing lighting for each individual site. However, we know that when new uplighting bulbs are installed, the initial effect on a typical billboard configuration is having spots that are in excess of 300 nits.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions or comments at this point? Thank you for your presentation. You please continue.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a letter in support from Harry Garofalo, ShopRite, in favor of the application and saying some complimentary words about the applicant. I'll just submit that, and we don't have any further presentation unless you have additional questions.
You're welcome to submit at any time.
Okay.
Does that conclude your presentation at this point?
Yes.
This is a public hearing, so I would invite the public up to the podium. We will start with anyone who is opposed to this application, and if you would, please speak into the microphone, state your name and address to the record. Try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you very much. So come up at your will.
Hello, Deanna Jacobs, 14 Darina Place, Milford. The only information I had about this is in the little announcement in the paper talking about zone changes in section 521, 525, 536, and 11.2. I got on the website in the city and got the current P&Z zoning regulations from March 22nd. Just a little sidebar in the table of contents, section 5.1, that's in Article 6. There's no mention of 5.2.1 to 5.3.6 in the table of contents. Then when you find the page, there's no reference to 5.2.5, so I don't even know what that is. Most of these, just this little blurb talking about CDD 1,3,5 and ICD and ID zone districts. First, I want to know, where can I get a copy of what all these initialisms mean? Do I just ask my P&Z person or Meg? So we know what we're talking about. I tried on the Milford website to find where these places were, and it was not, to use a current word, transparent. Not a clue where these places are. From what I'm hearing with this presentation, it seems like you're talking about billboards that are traditional billboards and are already in place, that you're going to replace with digital billboards. Is that correct? Or are new billboards going to be put in these CDD 1,3,5, et cetera places?
So we will get your questions answered. There is a way to get access to what a CDD1 is as opposed to an R5,
Yes.
and we'll be glad to explain that to you. And we will also get clarification from the applicant on whether or not these are brand new billboards or retrofitting existing billboards. So we will get that information to you tonight.
Thank you.
And I thank you for your interest and your presence here.
Well, do I still have time?
Yes, you do.
Okay, because time is one of the questions. If these proceed, Is this going to be something that will be endless, 24/7? Lights on all the time?
So, yeah, so do address to the board. We'll try to get you
Okay.
all the answers you want, for sure. We will try to address every question and
Okay.
concern.
Okay, so these would be on like forever? Okay. Would there be sound?
Good question, and we'll get that answered for you as well.
Thank you. Now, the main thing, if these are going to be new ones placed in Milford, I'd like to know about the size. This is one critical place where size does matter. Can this, if these are passed this way, that opens up a can of worms, so other changes can be added later on once a precedent is set.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And in the preamble of the P&Z regulations, it does talk about the purpose of the P&Z is to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the inhabitants of the city of Milford, and be consistent with the policies and objectives of the Milford Plan of Conservation and Development. As a resident of Milford, I can't help but see the presentation as a marketing presentation. I want to know who benefits, how the P&Z would consider things that were where the marketers benefit and not the people of Milford.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would, again, just quickly respond in that the benefit of a given billboard would be the information it provides, whether that benefits the person providing the information or the person receiving it, whether it's a good deal on a basketball hoop, so there's a benefit to the seller and to the buyer. But David, I would ask if you would respond to the questions on whether there is sound or whether there is a different size allowed. If you would just vet the questions that were asked with regard to the specifics of the application.
Sure. There is nothing in the proposed regulation that involves sound. So we understand billboards as being silent in terms of messaging. Whether or not the technology itself makes noise, the LEDs, that's a different question that we can ask the engineer versus a regular, light bulb. What was the other question?
And to the question of the size of the existing billboards as opposed to the proposed ability for a retrofitted billboard.
Well, the proposal itself is asking to take existing billboards, whether they're existing conforming or existing non-conforming, and allowing them to convert to the electronic billboard. And then the regulation that's being proposed has a size limit, and let me find it here. 14 by 48 would be the face size. And we can get clear.
So that's 48 feet wide and 14 feet tall.
Right.
And those are existing. If an existing billboard was larger than that, the new retrofit would have to be less than the existing.
Correct.
Okay.
And conversely, if there's a billboard that's smaller, it could
get
be made
bigger.
larger. Yes.
Could get bigger. So to the respondent, you will have a chance to ask further questions down the road if you have any after you hear more. So The next person, please come up, state your name and address for the board.
Thank you. My name is Jean Servine, Cervin, 3 Central Avenue. As a long-term P&Z board member and a past chair, I want to add my strong voice in opposition to this proposed regulation. I see a number of the board members that I worked with in the past, and it's nice to see your faces still working and trying to make these difficult decisions. Being here brings back a lot of memories for me. I think it's been stated, and I believe that last year you denied a digital billboard application from a Milford developer, a developer who I think owns 3 of those sites now that are being looked at. And so I'm wondering, what is the difference now with an application from an out-of-town developer and this applications for the zoning change seems to be driven by the request from this out-of-town developer. By approving this amendment, the pathway is cleared, as I see it, for any future applicant applying for digital billboards within these zoning districts. I doubt that it would be long before 7 possible locations on I-95, the ones that are possible now, would be digitalized. There are 5 permitted zones listed in the regulation request, change request. I do think that some of those CDD zones might also abut residential zones, and I would certainly hope that that would be looked into. If for some reason you would decide to approve this change, that each of those separate CDD zones would be thoroughly looked at in terms of intrusion into the residential neighborhoods. Particularly, I'm talking about light intrusion. An overarching question with any zone change is whether it is in the best interest of the city. I think the previous person was asking this question. The mayor has publicly supported digital billboards on I-95, and I can only assume that would be to any tax benefit there might be for the city. I don't believe he would be in support without all appropriate precautions being met, which would not be the case if this amendment is adopted. I think there might be a possibility of some of these billboards may be on personal property, and we know that's taxed differently from business property, and there wouldn't be the same accruement of funds through those taxes obtained. There are more than, I once thought there were just 30-plus billboards in Milford, but I have been told recently there may be as many as 60. That may be a question that Mr. Sulkus could answer, but we have many, many billboards, too many billboards in Milford. They have long been considered an eyesore. Many surrounding municipalities in years past had the foresight or the wisdom to ban them within their town limits. Unfortunately, this was not the case with Milford, and now we can do little about the existing billboards. But what we can do is prevent them from becoming more of an aesthetic and environmental assault by not allowing their conversion to electronic digitalization. I would contend that this zoning change, as written, appears to be an open door to the possibility of conversion of any city billboard in the 5 zones listed, and this for conversion, which would be known as a creeping regulation. That's a term used to talk about opening one door with the regulation that makes it much easier to open the next door. As a matter of interest, and to show the level of concern about digital billboards across the country, many states, as you may know, have completely banned them. Among those states, Alaska, Montana, Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii, and I think Rhode Island may be in the process of doing so. Many of our surrounding towns and municipalities have also prohibited digitalized billboards. I happen to think that Milford is prime pickings for national billboard companies. Here we are right on 95, and we've got the billboards up already, and I hope we're not naive and ignorant by approving something that we're not thoroughly informed about. A matter of major concern that has been overlooked, I believe, is that, and I know that digital billboards are extremely soft targets for hacking. There have been numerous incidents reported across the country where billboards have been hacked. Imagine driving down I-95 when suddenly a digital billboard changes to an unexpected and perhaps shocking message, which has happened. Obviously, a great safety concern. Some questions then. Are there provisions for security surveillance? Would there be security cameras in place? And I understand that to have proper coverage, you need a camera on the bottom of the sign and also somewhere on the top. And where are the cameras located then? And is there fencing? Will there be fencing provided around the billboards? As I understand it, most digital billboards have a control panel on site. It's my understanding at this moment. And how will that control panel be protected? I actually have done, on the research I've done on the internet, there actually, I think, is one site, if not two, that instructs hackers how to get to the billboards at the time of place and what to do so you can't be recognized or found later on. Another question, how will the messages be monitored? I understand, of course, a private billboard would be putting their own messages up, but it seems to me there may be a place where Milford might want to have some kind of oversight as to what is put on these billboards. Basically, I think there are way too many unknowns with the regulations as they are written now for them to be approved by the board. I would say let's not make it easier for applicants to be granted approval for digital billboards. Keep it within the board's purview. There are too many unknowns. And secondly, delay any action on an amendment change until it could be included in a discussion of the upcoming 10-year review of Milford's Plan of Conservation and Development, which I believe is up for review next year. This, of course, is a template for our future. Too often we make short-sighted decisions without looking at the long-term effects, and I fear this could be one of them. I respectfully ask for your careful consideration of this request and that you vote for denial. Thank you.
Thank you for your voice.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board. Brian Anderson, 49 Ingersoll Road. Tonight's my first night actually as a private citizen, and I just wanted to pay tribute to those of you who will be ending your terms within the next month. Thank you very much for your service on the Planning and Zoning Board. Mr. Marlowe, Mr. Grant, Mr. Panzella. This is the third time that this matter has come before the Planning and Zoning Board. There was a different applicant that came before you and withdrew their application some 3 years ago, I believe. The same applicant that is being heard tonight presented or submitted an application for new regulations last year that were not heard. But my concern is that once you open that door, it has unintended consequences. It opens the door for others who will benefit in the long run from an approval of these regulations. I'm sympathetic to Mr. Kersaden's client. He owns the property on Banner Drive. And it certainly sounds to me as if to take care of his issue, 6 other potential billboards would be benefiting from this particular application. It concerns me that one of those zones is a CDD1 zone. So I would ask that you consider slowing the process, thinking about a few things that I would like you to consider. One of which is that converting to digital billboards expands the carbon footprint. Many of us are concerned about the environment. Many of us got involved with the city's consideration of converting streetlights from an amber to 3,000 Kelvin lights. And at one time, the city had been proposing a higher wattage. Fortunately, we were able to prevail upon the city and say, you know, we want to be able to sleep at night. We want to have lighting that works for birds and other animals. My concern here is that there is an environmental impact when you talk about a billboard that changes every 10 seconds for 6 different businesses. That's over the course of 24 hours, 7 days a week. I have concerns about the impact for labor and union jobs. What does it mean in terms of those individuals that are currently working for billboard companies? The technology now exists to add to a billboard that can send a message to someone on their smartphones. There is information that is collected just as with our cell phone, and we receive ads from different organizations that pick up on a conversation that we may have or that track us based upon the research that we do, the search engine that we're using. The technology does exist today for a billboard to also to provide them with data for marketing purposes. So please consider that. I think another consideration has to be the height of the boards. If you look at the 7 locations that have been proposed, they're at various heights. Banner Drive is one of the tallest. West Avenue is one of the lowest. If you're driving down 95, West Avenue hits you right at your driving eye level. So there are a variety of different considerations relative to these proposed regulations, and I ask for you to consider it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jane Platt. I live at 132 Platt Lane. I've lived in Milford for 54 years. And I think that this is a quality of life issue, and I agree with the previous speakers about all their concerns. And I want to tell you just a little thing that happened to me last month. My brother was seriously ill and in the hospital up in New Hampshire, and our family traveled up there, and we were in New Hampshire and Vermont. And it was very stressful. My brother was sick, and the car broke down. So when my brother drove me, the other brother drove me to get our car, I felt so relaxed and refreshed because we were in Vermont where they do not allow billboards, billboards. And there was virtually no litter there either. So it was very relaxing, and I think it's too late here in Milford, but I don't want it to get worse. So I live in Milford, the small city with the big heart, but I don't want it to become the small city with the big lights. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dominic Cotton, 60 Corona Drive. I'd like to thank the board for listening to all of us tonight, and I'd like to echo the sentiments of what others have previously stated. I guess I take a look at this from a slightly different perspective. I work with people with brain injury, and so I tend to look at things a little bit differently than a lot of other people do. And I know for me, my biggest concern with electronic billboards is safety and distractibility. And the fact that you have a 10-second refresh on these billboards is going to have people take a look at them and take their eyes directly off of the road. Now, we have 7 exits in Milford, more than any of the surrounding communities. So we have a lot of people that are entering and exiting. We have a major interchange with the Milford Parkway going up to the Merritt Parkway. And I drive those on a daily basis. When I look at the billboards, and I know that they're vinyl, I tend to not focus in on them because I've already looked once and I know what they say. So I knew when Big Y was going to open. I drove past it, and if I look at something like that, then I take my eyes, I look at it for 1 second, and I already know the message, and I look back down onto the road. Now, I was also thinking about some of the other spaces that were mentioned as far as electronic billboards that are currently available. I know most of our signage is around foliage, so it has a different level of distraction. When I'm coming over the Wheelers Farm Bridge going into Stratford, there's an electronic sign there. There's also no other things around in the surrounding area. And so I can look at that really quickly, and I know that there's no exit ramp that's going off there. I know there are no other vehicles that are coming into my lane. So the chance that these things would cause an accident because of distractibility goes down. You're talking about 7 signs in an area that has 7 exits. That's going to have an effect on traffic. That's going to have an effect on accidents. We're going to have to send our fire department out for a lot of those accidents. So what this ends up doing is it causes us, the taxpayers, more money. So until the experts can really take a look at the specifics of those issues, to me it's not a lighting situation, it's a distraction, and it's a safety concern. And it's also the concern that we open this up, and there's going to be other billboards that are going to go around similarly around the town. So I know unintended consequences are what we have to look at whenever you're going to change a major regulation like this. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Richard Platt at 132 Platt Lane, excuse me. First of all, there was a question, I think, from the first speaker about what the benefit would be from this type of electronic billboard, and you said providing information. Ladies and gentlemen, I am already suffering from information overload, being assaulted by advertisements all over the place. Please, let's not add any more to it, because I have to also agree with the previous speaker just now. These things are eye-catching. And driving into West Haven to the Veterans Hospital this morning, my eye was caught by the electronic billboard there. I want to keep my eyes on the road, but I couldn't help myself. I was staring at the darn billboard, and this is just another case of distracted driving. And fortunately, I didn't leave the road or anything like that, but I was conscious of the fact that, as I said, this was a distraction. I won't elaborate because I think some of the previous speakers have covered these things a lot more than I have.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Mary Oak. I live at 30 Jorinna Place. As you can hear, my accent is not American, it's British. I came to this country after I was born here in my late teens, and I was practically horrified by these billboards. I still am. I'm an artist. I understand from a marketing point of view the sales aspect about them, but they are purely ugly. There's nothing beautiful about them. They're all about sales. And as a driver, learning to drive in the UK, Our driving test is damn difficult to pass, unlike the American driving test. And friends of mine, when I've had to deal with awkward situations on the road, have been amazed at how well I'm able to not end up in an accident. Now, the population of the human race in this country is aging, and that percentage is increasing over the population that is younger. As you grow older, your eyes do not work as well. So consequently, distractions is an issue. I am very aware of this because I work now part-time with the elderly, helping them to stay in their homes. I do this because I want to, but it makes it very clear to me that these will be a serious distraction, besides being an eyesore. And I wonder, how much energy are they using to create these over the regular billboards that you have? We need to stop using our natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ann Berman. I live at 77 Pelham Street. And it wasn't too long ago when I was part of an issue that a billboard was built on New Haven Avenue, and it went up. It was the size that they use on highways. Well, at that time, of course, it was illegal, but it got passed at 5 o'clock Friday afternoon, but we did get it down, and he had to move it. Now, billboards in this town are an eyesore, and we have put up with them. In fact, there's one that's only a few feet away from this building, and they're all over the place. The landscape is just destroyed by it. Now, the other thing that I'm worried about is these flashing lights. You say they're not flashing, but just look up at the ceiling. See that? See that light up there? It's probably gone awry. Well, those lights can go awry at any time. And I do know that flashing lights like that for a person who suffers from epilepsy can cause a problem. I also know that the flashing light, the change of light, can be a distraction. Since I'm an older driver, I know that the steering wheel, you can move it once, just move it just a little bit, and you could be in trouble, particularly on a highway. So one glance up at one of these billboards can get you in deep trouble. I've been passed a little article. Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that I remember years ago they said how the advertisement on TV, they're so clever with lights. There's subliminal messages that go across that we aren't even aware of. But these subliminal messages can change politics. We have enough trouble with politics in this country. We don't need any more subliminal. Now, there was an article that was in the Week magazine. I'm just going to read you this. Keeping your eyes on the road after a digital billboard along I-95, or this was on I-75 in Michigan, started broadcasting hardcore pornography, quotes. I was just looking up at it, and I was like, oh, wow. That's porn, said the driver, Chuck McMahon. Police are investigating. Well, that can happen at any time here. We have enough problems with billboards as it is, and if they can start with putting them on the highway, before they know it, it'll be in town, and then they're going to add sound. We have enough light pollution to harm all the insects and the people and the animals and us. They're disturbing to sleep patterns. And not only that, but the, as an environmentalist, we're trying to be more sustainable. I don't know what the kilowatt hours are to produce one of these billboards. I would like to know. That's using up electricity that we could use in other ways. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Donna Dutko, 236 Buckingham Avenue. I have a little handout, and this is an excerpt from the Connecticut General Statutes, Chapter 124, Section 8.2, Regulations.
Thank you. If you would just make sure you speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, so in the Connecticut General Statutes, it refers to uniform zoning regulations. And I highlighted that verbiage. It says, all such regulations shall be uniform for each class and kind of buildings, structures, or uses of land throughout each district. But the regulations in one district may differ from those in another district, blah, blah, blah. So the key point here is uniform zoning within a zone. So if digital billboards are allowed by right in a zone, it's allowed by right in the entire zone. So that's my first comment. And regardless of the provisions, like, oh, it can only be on the highway, but it's also a free speech issue. So when you tie free speech and uniform zoning in together, now you have, somebody on the Post Road saying, well, they got it there, this is free speech, I'm in that zone, I want it here also. I also concur with everybody else who spoke previously. They are both distracting and dangerous. 10 seconds of an advertisement, you could see two different advertisements in the 10 seconds as you're passing by that sign. So you see one, it's like, oh, well, what did that say? Wait, that went off, the next message is on the board. And then you're waiting for that other message to come back on because you want to see it. So it's more than distracting, it's getting your attention off the road to try and focus on what you just thought you saw, and now you're coming back to it and looking for that same ad over again. So then I also have a question. How would this be enforced? How would the lighting and the lumens and the, what were the other codes they use, NITS? How would they be enforced? And who would do this enforcement? And how much would it cost for that to be enforced? Another cost to the city. And they also mentioned that they can't meet the 0.5 lumens that are allowed in a commercial district. Now that's above the ambient light. But there's also residential properties in these CDD zones, and they have that 0.5 level of lighting. So they mentioned that they wouldn't allow the light to go into residential zones, but what about the residential properties within the CDD zones? You need to consider that. And then lastly, I think this is my last point, there's a billboard on Gulf Street near St. Mary's Church, and I believe that is light industrial, just before you go under the viaduct, the railroad underpass. And that's an existing billboard. That's in an allowed zone. And does that mean that now we're going to have a digital billboard going under Gulf Street before you get to New Haven Avenue? Questions, because you don't know the scope. You don't know what the implications are of all these regulations. A lot of verbiage in that regulation, and it's hard to digest. So I'm hoping that you will see that the citizens' concern here have a lot of merit. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. David, would you speak to your understanding of the proposed regulation, and if in fact that Gulf Street billboard would be allowed to become a digital billboard?
According to the proposed regulation, the billboard has to be adjacent to the I-95 corridor. So if it's not adjacent to I-95, according to the proposed regulation, then that wouldn't be the case.
Okay, so even though it's in a district that is identified as being a change, that specific billboard would not be allowed to be digital, and only those on the I-95 corridor are at risk, so to speak, of being changed into digital billboards. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding of the proposal.
All right, thank you.
Can I reply?
Yeah, you're welcome to come back up, sure.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Donna Dutko again. Now, going back to the uniform zoning requirements, again, state statutes say that if you have a use within a zone, it applies to every property, building, use, structure in that zone. You can say it's limited to I-95, but somebody else in that zone is going to say that's not a valid limitation.
Thank you. Good point. Anyone else like to speak against?
Hi, good evening. My name is Nancy Iddings. I live at 136 Housatonic Drive. I'm going to make this short, but probably not too sweet. I'm very much against allowing digital billboard signs as they are distracting, unattractive, and do not fit into our Milford community style. Milford is seen as a quaint New England community with charm. We are not Las Vegas, nor do we want to be. Please reject any proposals for this type of sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Dora Kubek, 33 Liberty Street, Milford. I-95 is one of the busiest and most dangerous highways we have in the country. So why does it make sense to put up distracted or signs that change every 10 seconds, flash something different, different colors, different fonts? Every 10 seconds, you're driving on 95, you're distracted. How is that not even worse than texting while you're in your car, for instance? I don't understand. This seems to be the stupidest idea I can imagine. I am afraid that this will set a precedent. This does set a precedent if it goes through. I feel like it's an assault on our senses. There is no value that it brings to the city in my eyes. And this is just distracted driving on steroids. And I also am concerned about the hacking possibility. So I hope that you deny the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sandy Morgan. I live at 39 Orland Street in Bayview. We have a beautiful city here, and I think that if we have electronic billboards advertising, this is Milford, it's kind of honky-tonk, and I don't think we are honky-tonk. I think we have one of the most beautiful cities in the state, and to create distraction, light pollution, flashing messages, I just don't think that speaks to Milford. Also, being in sales myself when I was working, the benefit of these signs is really the sign owner as he sells the advertisement. There's information all over everywhere for anyone who's interested in anything, they can find it. And they don't need to see it flashing every 10 seconds as a distraction. Also, have there been any studies done on, long-term studies done on driving safety for these signs? There must be reasons that a lot of people have banned them besides just that they're ugly. Also, I do agree that it will open the door to everything since it is a regulation that's blanket. And I would hate to see an electronic billboard right on downtown, like on Broad Street. I'm just really concerned that there's no benefit to the city of Milford and only to the people who own the signs. Thank you. I hope you'll deny the request.
No, thank you for your concern. And we will ask the applicant to talk to any studies on safety. If I forget, hopefully someone will remind me to do so. Is there anyone else who would like to speak against the application?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of letters that came to the office. I could read into the record.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I have a couple of letters, emails that we received in the office that I could read into the record from two individuals who are opposed.
Do you want to read them or do you want to just submit them?
I'll read them.
Okay, please go for it.
Dear Mr. Griffith, I'm writing to express my disapproval for the petition to allow digital billboard signs in Milford. I opposed it the last time this petition was raised and was pleased that it was withdrawn. Nothing has changed since the last time this petition was raised. They are still distracting, unattractive, and negatively affect many drivers with certain vision conditions. We do not need them and do not want them here. Milford is growing and thriving, but an essential part of maintaining that growth is maintaining its current charm. Digital billboards will only negatively impact this charm. Please reject any proposals for these types of signs. Sincerely, Sarah Bromley, 27 Norway Street. Dear Mr. Griffith, I would like to go on record as opposing the proposed change to the City of Milford zoning regulations regarding allowing electronic digital billboard signs. Ordinary billboards are unattractive and a blight on the landscape. They are distracting to drivers, which is their purpose, after all. Electronic digital billboards are even more unattractive, as well as being far more distracting to safe driving. Milford is such a beautiful small New England city, offering a quality of life not easily found elsewhere. It's the reason we all live here. Let's do all we can to keep it that way. Sincerely, Alana Fagan, 23 Housatonic Drive.
Thank you. With the lack of anyone wishing to speak against, I would invite anyone that's speaking for the application to come to the podium. Seeing none, I would offer the applicant an opportunity to rebut any of the comments made by the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll address some of the comments, and Mr. Tsien will address the other ones. First, there is I do have a study that's being handed out now. It was done by the Federal Highway Administration, confirming the safety of digital billboards and signs. I'll read it into the record. The U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration has released a landmark study declaring that digital billboards do not pose a safety risk to passing motorists. For those within the industry, the results of this study came as no surprise. Numerous traffic studies and analysis performed in the last couple of decades have come to a similar conclusion. The report actually divided into two studies is officially titled Driver Visual Behavior in the Presence of Commercial Electronic Variable Message Signs. And for the purpose of the studies, the FHA refers to digital billboards as commercial electronic variable message signs. The studies sought to address three specific questions. Do these types of signs attract drivers' attention away from the forward roadway and other driving relevant stimuli? Do glances to these signs occur that would suggest a decrease in safety? And do drivers look at these signs more than at standard billboards? To conduct the study, the FHA tracked participants' eye movements with an eye-tracking camera device mounted in the vehicle. The device was able to track the driver's eyeball movement and determine if the driver was looking ahead at the roadway or off to the side of the roadway at a static billboard or messaging sign. Drivers in Richmond, Virginia, and Reading, Pennsylvania participated in the study, and the research concluded that drivers do indeed look at digital billboards longer than they do at static billboards. Glance duration toward digital billboards averaged 0.379 seconds, while glances at static billboards were 0.335 seconds at both test sites. Both of these measurements fall far below the 2-second benchmark, which would constitute a hazard, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. In conclusion, the study states the results did not provide evidence indicating that these signs, as deployed and tested in the 2 selected cities, were associated with unacceptably long glances away from the road. When dwell times longer than the currently accepted threshold of 2,000 milliseconds occurred, the road ahead was still in the driver's field of view. This was the case for both types of signs, standard billboards and the digital signs. The peer-reviewed study stated to help put to rest concerns that digital billboards and other outdoor digital signs pose a hazard to passing motorists. The study will also help pave the way for communities to bring the powerful outdoor advertising medium to their communities, benefiting not just local operators and advertisers, but the entire local economy as well, which goes to another point about the benefit. In addition to public service announcements on a regular basis for the municipality and various nonprofits and other organizations and entities, you have the benefit of advertising for local businesses and supporting the local businesses that exist here in the Milford community. With respect to the uniformity regulation brought up by Ms. Dutko, that there is a uniformity requirement that regulations be applied uniformly. If you have a regulation in an R5 zone, for example, it has to be applied uniformly throughout the zone. But however, there are restrictions and limitations to what you can do and parameters built into the zoning regulations. So for example, I think what Ms. Dutko was saying was that because it was an inverse assumption that if we allow it on the LI zone next to 95, somebody's going to come in and try to pull a permit for one on Gulf Street or Cherry Street because it's also in the LI zone. That's not how the uniformity requirement works. If somebody wanted to challenge a regulation in court, especially a regulation that you've decided, which I don't want to sidetrack too far, when you hear a regulation change, you're acting in your legislative capacity, and you have a lot of deference and ability to decide if you think it's in the city's best interests, using your police powers, meaning the general health, safety, and welfare of the community. If you think that this regulation fits into that or is not in violation of that, or that it's not in violation of the Plan of Conservation and Development, which this use is not in violation of that because billboards are already allowed. I looked at the Plan of Conservation and Development today. Billboard is not mentioned once, whether favorably or negatively, and there's no discussion about commercial signs in that Plan of Conservation and Development. So it's not adverse to the Plan of Conservation and Development, and there are existing uses. So you're able legally and statutorily to approve this legislation is what it is at your discretion, or you can amend, you could seek to some amendments to this proposed regulation if you saw fit. But the uniformity requirement essentially doesn't mean that everybody gets to do the same thing in every zone. It's just that the regulations are applied uniformly in each one of those zones. We talked about safety briefly. I didn't want to bore everybody with going into the details of the regulation word by word at the beginning of it, but there seems to be a lot of concern that there's going to be a slippery slope, or this is opening the door to making that they're going to be at downtown on the green, or they're going to find their ways into other locations in the Milford community, or that there's going to be either sound or there's going to be messages transmitted from these signs. Our expert will talk about some of the technical aspects of that, but the regulation as proposed is strictly limited to these 7 locations. The way it's worded, it cannot be located in any other place in town. They're all adjacent to I-95 or separated by the railroad and I-95, and so we might have to address that provision of it slightly. But the way it's currently written, these are the only locations it can be in, and that this use could come to fruition if you decided to approve this application. I can't speak to what somebody in the future is going to come in and ask the board to do, and you may 15 years from now decide to allow these someplace else. I have no idea. I don't, like to see a lot of changes. I grew up in Milford myself, but it's entirely at your discretion. So you would be the gatekeepers of that. How it's enforced would be the zoning enforcement officer, and there are light measuring devices that could be used. There's language in the regulation that says what the standard measurement needs to be and what the maximum measurements need to be. So that would be the enforcement of it. Also, there's DOT regulations that limit how many billboards can be put up and how many, what their maximum illumination can be. So, and it's also enforced within the industry. Mr. Gannon's here tonight. I've learned a lot about, not as much as these gentlemen, but I've learned a lot about this over the past year and a half. And there seems to be a lot of respect for the community and working with the community, and also self-regulation. And the devices, the technology is such that the devices are regulated to a certain extent. And I'm sure Mr. Tsien will talk about if something malfunctions or something goes awry, like the light overhead. Which, speaking of which, if you think about it, 10 seconds, if you set a timer right now, it'd be an uncomfortably long pause. 10 seconds would be an uncomfortably long pause. That's just my general experience. But we met the notice requirements when you do under the state statute and Milford regulations. If we're not doing a zone change, we're doing a text change, or we're not doing a zone map change. We don't mail out notices to anybody. It just gets published in the paper, and all of the information is on file at the zoning office. This proposed application is on file. It's on digital and hard copy form. My understanding is that just like the signs that currently exist, these signs are going to be lit up overnight, and because they are digital signs, they will be lit 24/7. That is correct, and the light that's being emitted and the illumination will vary due to the daylight, the illumination of the daylight. So the billboards that currently exist are lit up now as well. I don't believe. Like I said, there's not going to be any sound. I don't know if the technology makes noise. I'll ask Mr. Tsien to address that. Mr. Tsien will address the security questions about hacking. I don't know, other than this board being the gatekeeper and listening to people in the community about something like a regulation like this changing someplace else in town, but we went through a lot of work to word the regulations so they would only be allowed at these limited sites. And what we're proposing will not change anything else in the city of Milford. think, and so to speak to that, we do know, you know, there are intended and unintended consequences and of regulation changes and every other action, but we know the scope. We've limited the scope to these existing sites and that meet these existing parameters. So I don't see somebody coming in and arguing something different to Stephen Harris, asking them to give him a permit for something that's in a different location. The CDD1 zone, the one CDD1 zone that has the residential use, which is at near the West Avenue site, which the West Avenue billboard location. It's not throughout the CDD1 zone generally. So once again, it would be limited to this site, and we've done the analysis to, Mr. Chen has done that analysis to make sure that we can meet the regulations as they exist for residential properties. Now, I think that's residential zone in the regulations, and that's a residential use. So, not to bore anybody further because I've talked too much, but the distinction is important because if the regulation says 0.1 in a residential zone, well, I don't think the CDD1 is considered, there's residential uses allowed, but that's not a residential zone. So I think that we even exceed the standard of the current regulations. And I'll be followed by Mr. Sien.
Thank you. Yeah, I can address some of the other additional technical issues as they all kind of fall under my wheelhouse here. Firstly, on the sound issue, there's no product for digital billboard out there that will generate sound. All components, all digital billboards will have ventilation fans, but besides ventilation fans, everything else in them is solid state. So the sound coming from it would just be from some small 4.7-inch ventilation fans. So that's that first one. With regards to, there was a very interesting question raised about data analytics and, this, technology out there that might monitor or track our movements, track our phones, determine if we're in the area looking at the digital billboards. It is true the industry for outdoor advertising has been looking at these technologies. As of currently, no technologies are mature, and they don't. And secondly, they're fundamentally independent from digital billboards. So it's something that you can install, someone could install on a house, they could install it anywhere else. It's a separate, independent piece of technology, and they have their own regulatory concerns regarding privacy and all this other stuff. So that should be treated as a separate issue with the billboards. There was a mention about the flashing light that's happening up there. If you see the digital billboards out there, all of them will have a a monitoring camera at the front looking back at the display. Additionally, all modern displays being sold today will have internal diagnostics and monitoring systems, and they're generally backed by a full network operations center. For example, we have our own 7-person network operations center who tracks and monitors these things. So a situation like that would be treated as a critical type of alert and would probably constitute a shutdown of the sign until it's fixed. So that's regarding the sort of flashing failures. There was a very good question also about power consumption and sort of environmental friendliness, and it really resonates with me because I'm actually a kind of an aspiring sort of eco kind of guy. I have 2 electric cars. I generate almost no plastic waste. I'm very, very conscientious of these things. And with regards to digital billboards, it's the power consumption for a 1448, the ones we're talking about here, at maximum draws 12 kilowatts. That's the power they draw. So when you average that out to per day, it's about a 3 kilowatt average. So what happens is that's comparable to a HVAC unit, like a commercial or an industrial, air conditioning unit. So just in the same way that a commercial or industrial property might be using that to do business, the power consumption on the board is actually quite similar. LEDs are generally pretty efficient, and it's important to take into account the mitigation from not having to drive out there, print the vinyl, install the vinyl, replace them, and dispose of the vinyl, there's actually no practically good way to do. So depending on the situation, it could be better or worse to go with the digital billboards. But in general, if the energy around here is clean, it will definitely be a environmental positive to go with digital billboards. So again, it depends on the power. So there was a discussion on the distraction, which was already discussed. Oh, and lastly, from my side here, that hacking, someone had a great little excerpt from the hacking document. I was at a conference on a technical standards committee, and that hacking event had just happened, and you should have seen the uproar it caused in the self-regulating, as Mr. Crusaden said, the self-regulating sort of industry community. And it basically caused us all to be extremely anxious, because we don't want that to happen to anybody. It's because it's horrible for everybody. And when we looked into it, it was because it was a physical break-in of a poorly secured room at the base of a billboard. They just broke in there and hooked up their laptop. So most manufacturers today will have good security measures. Control panels are isolated on the top of the structures. They're secured by locking mechanisms, as well as security alarms that would shut the board off if someone attempted to tamper with them. Anybody who's not doing that, believe me, after that Michigan event, has that high on their product development list to sort out, because nobody will buy a product now that is not secured. So that's related to hacking. So it's, I would say that the likelihood of it happening is diminishing rapidly. Is there anything else? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments from the board at this time? Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the three gentlemen across the room, I think it's probably to Attorney Crusaden. You had mentioned twice about the public service announcement, so I have three questions related to that. In the first part of your presentation, you talked about letters of agreement. I think we should get a copy of the letters of agreement that you're referring to, so we can get an educated ability to understand what they are. Related to that question, though, is what is the limitation, if any, placed on it? So is it one public service announcement for every 20 hours of non-public service? So if you could address that. I don't need the answer right this second. And the third, quite frankly, is there's been mention of two surrounding towns, I believe West Haven, three actually, Stratford and Bridgeport. How often do they use them? Whatever the letter of agreement is, how often has it been used? Those are questions I'd like to have answered. I just have one comment. I thought the presentation was going pretty well until you handed us this ad. This is an ad from a company called Digital Signage Today, and it would be important if we could see what the study actually says. It's not referenced anywhere in this ad that you provided to us. I appreciate why you wanted to put it up there, but if you want us to understand about this study, we should read the study and see what it is, rather than this person's opinion that he thinks what the study says. Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
I had a quick question in regards to the 10-second transition. Are you open to extending that or duration of 15 seconds or more? Or I know it might be from a marketing standpoint, you probably want to get your information out there as much as possible, but are you open to that?
And if you just sort of write them down and answer them all at once, if you would.
Absolutely.
Anyone else have a question? Mr. Marlowe.
Mr. Chair.
Again, at this study that was done, I did happen to go online and looked at the Federal Highway Administration, and there is an actual study besides this, obviously. But my concern is that right below that, by an independent foundation, was called enotrans.org, was the website. And it says that, hey, the data that was used and how it was collected was not accurate. So they're pointing out as many flaws in this that was done by the Federal Highway Association. So I'm not sure which to believe now. It seems to me that the idea behind digital signage or any billboard is, hey, I want you looking at it. So I don't know how, it seems counterintuitive to say, hey, nobody looks at it, because then why would we be doing it? So.
David?
The question came up about the noise of the equipment, and we were told that they might have some little fans, and it's sound is measured in decibels. What's the decibel level of these billboards? That's question one. Question two, which sort of, I think someone had asked the question about really how much power this uses, and I guess the question that wasn't answered is, how much power does one of these boards, electronic billboards, use compared to the standard billboard that's out there now? Is there a big difference in that? And then I too had questions about the handout from the Federal Highway Administration, because it references two locations, Richmond, Virginia, and Reading, Pennsylvania, which are very large areas. And there's nothing in here that tells us that it's really an apples-to-apples comparison. We're talking about an area that is an interstate highway in a highly developed urban area. And I think the conditions on I-95 are going to be different than roadways in Richmond and Reading, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to guess that they're including in there a lot of secondary roads that have billboards. So I'd really like to know how much of that study done by the Federal Highway Administration was on interstate highways located in heavily traveled urban areas, because that would be an apples-to-apples comparison.
Thank you, David. Is there any other questions or comments from the board? Anyone else would like to ask a question of the applicant? If you would, answer the 3 or 4 questions that the board had before we allow rebuttal from the public.
Thank you. There's a couple of really interesting and good questions in there. And, you know, as someone who spent about 4.5, 5 years doing research work in the university, this sort of critical thinking on I would say, on scientific literature is very important. So I was just kind of looking up this as well here. That one particular study looked credible because it has, it's backed by federal sort of, you know, agency. More generally, from a science perspective, systematic literature reviews are treated as more of evidence-driven, it's evidence, right? So systematic reviews are considered the basis of evidence-based medicine. So in 2014, there was I'm just looking at it here, I could share this somehow, but there's a study from the University of Alabama at Birmingham called The Impact of Billboards on Driver Visual Behavior. It's a systematic literature review. And they have here included 8 studies that met their inclusion criteria, and their final results were similar to what they showed there. And then I'll just say here, and I'll just read out the conclusion from their abstract. Generally, billboard-related distraction appears to be minor and regulated by drivers as the demands of the driving task changed. However, this review's findings suggest that this may not be true in all cases. So again, there is some truth to that it's here versus there. It's not always the same. But this would be a good place for further understanding is the systematic review. Regarding
So if again, that URL, we can share that. I'm not sure that we're going to act on this tonight, and we would be able to, having it be in the record now, we can access it for ourselves, because we obviously can't read it all together out loud.
Right, well,
continue.
Okay, great, thank you. Related to sound, you're right, it's measured in dBA, so it's just A-weighted for human perception. The fans themselves will be below the ambient dBA level from any sort of highway traffic. So you will be unable to read it out by ear or by any sound measurement instrument. And that one I'm willing to sign off on anytime. That's factual. Because of the distance of the display up in the air, the relatively minor sound of it, and the ambient noise from the highway underneath.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
In a moment, let's have, let them address each one of their concerns. I mean, let them address the concerns that the board and staff have already made.
I think there was the distraction study and then business sound. What was the other one?
Yeah, okay. I think just to make sure we have everything in line. To answer Mr. Sadi's question, we'll provide the studies that are referenced in that the handout. The letter of agreement, each municipality would handle that differently. So we can provide a sample letter of agreement, and it would really be in a draft form based on how the city of Milford wanted to handle it. It would probably have to be approved through the city attorney's office and through staff. So we can provide a sample copy with that. So I think we owe you a couple of pieces of information, which is the study that's referenced both by myself and Mr. Cien and that document, and then a copy of a proposed letter agreement that would work when someone, that could be used when somebody applies for a permit.
Mr. Solkis, would you care to ask that question you had in queue?
He brought up ambient sound levels. So, what's the ambient sound level at a given location? Because there's going to be different ambient sound levels at different locations along the highway. So I think that was a clever way of answering and not answering. So it could be loud, or it could be soft, depending on how much traffic is going by.
So may I just make sure I understand the question? Is the question that Mr. Sulkus wants to know what the ambient sound level is on the side of I-95? Is that the question?
I think that sound level, then the delta between that and the fan, I would imagine is de minimis, but it's a question, so.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, so the thing about dB scale is it's a logarithmic scale. So when you double it, it goes up by 3 dBs, right? And if you double the amount of, literally the intensity of the sound, it goes up by 3 dBs. So when you're talking about a typical, and I could, a typical highway would have to be in the, your base level of hearing is about 30 dBA, right? So a highway is somewhere between that and what an industrial limit is for noise exposure, which is 85 dBA. So, a long-term exposure, 85 dBA is considered the limit. These fans, and dBA also falls off with distance. So when you're right beside one of these fans, it sounds like a computer sitting beside you, but you could put yourself 100 feet away from it. You'd be challenged, regardless of the ambient, to hear it. And then, your highway is, we know from experience, it's considerable. I don't want to put numbers to it because I would be kind of pulling it out of thin air, without evidence. So, but it should kind of stand to reason that computer fans, just small, ball-bearing fans, should not compete with highway traffic, especially when it's 100 feet away. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board before we invite the public to? Would you go ahead and ask your question?
The question was asked previously in regards to extending the duration time, the 10 seconds or more, if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, I forgot to answer that one. The way that the advertising is sold is in the 10-second increments, so it's not possible to extend it to 15 seconds. It doesn't work that, the industry doesn't work that way, is my understanding. I can get some more information on that for you, but the industry standard is 8 to 10 seconds. We had put it at the 10 seconds to try to take into consideration those concerns that, the concerns that were raised here tonight that we were anticipating. But 10 seconds would be the most of a change in the screen that we could agree to.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes, go ahead.
So in neighboring communities, New Haven, Stratford, Bridgeport, is that the interval that they use, 10 seconds?
Yes.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Crusaden. One of the things I forgot to ask earlier, on the proposal, which is, it's on page 4, but the size, 14 by 48, I didn't ask that before. Could you explain where that number comes from, please?
Well, where it came from, the existing billboards are 14 by 48, and that is also the industry standard. So, and that's also, I think it's the Outdoor Advertising Association of America, which is where we got a lot of this information for proposing the application. Those are the standard signs. Well, it's one of the standard sizes of signs. Is that correct? Yeah.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, on one of the depictions, I think it was the Bridgeport one, you're putting it up. So basically, the billboards in Milford are 14 by 48. To replace that, though, you're going to have to basically take a whole new structure and put it up. Is that the plan?
That's a great question, and we didn't answer that before. It's refacing the existing structure. So they're not... Okay, I'll let Mr. Gannon answer that question.
If you would state your name and address for the record.
My name is David Gannon, Outfront Media, and it's on located at Washington Street, North Haven, Connecticut. Some of the billboards could be retrofitted as they exist today. Other ones, we would have to get an engineer in there to see if anything needed to be replaced from the ground up. But anything that would be replaced in the exact same spot it was prior to it being a digital conversion.
Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions from the board, which you will have an opportunity to do so later, we will invite the public up to rebut or ask more questions of the applicant. So if anyone would like to come up and speak, please do so now. State your name and address again also, please, for the record. Thank you.
Hi, Donna Dutko, 236 Buckingham Avenue. So if we trust our federal government on the federal safety studies, we might want to take a look at the vaping situation that's going on lately, and nothing's hazardous until somebody gets hurt. So, they've let the vaping business go through, and now people are dying from it. They do these studies, and how do you trust their studies? That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Well, Richard Platt again. On the question of the public service announcements, to my mind, they're still a distraction. I don't care if you have more or fewer. It's no different from an advertisement as far as distracted driving is concerned.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say at this point that I appreciate the questions asked by Mr. Sulkus and by the other board members. I'm left right now with a feeling that there are many more questions and things that need to be clarified before any final decision can be made about this. I also think it's important to look at the cost to the city and the benefit to the developer. I would hope that in any application request change of regulation, that the primary concern would be, does this benefit the city at least as much as the developer, if not more? And yet I'm not convinced that this is the case. Public announcements and possibly advertisements for small businesses may be a good thing, but that needs to be evaluated again in terms of the benefit. The taxes for me are still another question that I think should be further researched to find out how important that is for our city. The other thing, I think there were two things. One was the plan of conservation and development. I know, Mr. Crusaden, that in the current plan of conservation and development, there may not be anything about billboards. But the important thing about doing this every 10 years is to make sure that everything is in that plan and that there's an opportunity for the board and the public to look forward to the future to see what we would like to see. And if there was something that was overlooked, that it certainly can be put back in the plan. I know I had one more thing, but I can't think of what it is. And anyway, please give this long, serious discussion. It deserves it.
Thank you.
I'm concerned that the people on the board today are not going to be the people on the board come January, and it's a really major decision. I would like to see it at least postponed and brought again before the new board.
Thank you. Excuse me, would you please come to the podium again and state your name and address for the record? We didn't get it the first time. Sorry about that. Just speak into the mic. I'd appreciate it.
Oh, that's okay. My name is Sandy Morgan, and I live at 39 Orland Street since 1991.
Thank you. I'm sorry to put you through that, but thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in rebuttal, either for or against? Seeing none, the applicant has an opportunity to close, and then the board will have an opportunity to question the applicant.
Thank you. If the hearing's going to be closed tonight, we ask that it be kept open for the additional information that we provide. That's the first thing. The second thing is Ms. Dutko was talking about the federal government. It reminded me of the fact that the federal government and the state government are the agencies that set the rules for the highway on I-95 and the safety regulations. So it's really, if digital billboards are allowed by the state of Connecticut and the federal government, there would seem to me that there is a certain measure of safety consideration that's taken into that. So those are really, other than the additional information with the studies that we can provide to staff, we just ask that if the board can if it does keep the public hearing open tonight, that it keeps it open for those limited pieces of information.
Thank you. So that's a close on your part?
Yes, it is.
So, David, would you like to have any comment?
Yeah, as custom would dictate, I'll read to you my little summary. The applicant proposes to allow the conversion of existing conforming and non-conforming static billboards into electronic digital billboards. As described in the amendments, the size of the billboard face would be limited to 14 feet by 48 feet and would be no brighter than 0.3 foot candles over ambient lighting levels, the method of measurement as spelled out in the proposal, and would be unique to billboards. As described in the amendment, light levels would be certified by, and if this was, I guess, clarified this evening, by an engineer, not an architect or engineer, but an engineer. As described in the amendment, light levels would also be exempt from current light trespass levels per section 5.2.3. As described in the amendment content would be allowed to change a minimum of every 10 seconds. As described in the amendment, the face of the billboard would have to be 90 degrees or less facing I-95 and be within 200 feet from the, quote, I-95 corridor, unquote. And just I would suggest, because there's new information that would be coming in, I would leave the public hearing open because that new information could lead to other questions and public input.
Understood. Is there any question or comments from the board at this point? So, Mr. Sadi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 areas of questions that I have. First and foremost, what financial impact at all to the city is there going to be? Is there going to be an increase in taxes or a decrease? I'm assuming it's a property tax issue as opposed to other types, but I'm just trying to find that out, number one. Number two, some of the materials that have been referenced predate some members of this board. So has there been if there was a regulation subcommittee report on that, of this proposal, if we can get that at some point, if there was?
There are probably minutes, but there's probably not a report, so to speak. So we
Yeah, just
can make those minutes available to the present board.
And then the last area that I had is in reference to the total number. If we just get the total number of billboards, I understand the petitioner's position is it's only going to involve 6 or 7, but total number of billboards in the city that may or may not be impacted by the regulation. I'm not suggesting they would, but just maybe. Thank you.
So if we could, again, we will leave the public hearing open, and if we can make note of that question from Mr. Sadi, I think that's a question that staff can provide the answer for rather than the applicant. So without exception, we will keep the public hearing open without restriction. It will be open for any and all new information. And without exception from the board, that's the way we'll close it tonight. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you to the public for coming out and spending your time with us. We appreciate all your concerns, as we do the concerns of the applicant. Thank you. So our meeting is still going on, so if you would, on your way out, just be quiet so we can take care of the rest of our business. We have no liaison reports and subcommittee reports. The POCD will spend December getting ready for the new board and will not meet again in December. We have approval of the minutes for the 11/6 meeting. Do I have a motion? Mr. Marlowe. Second? Peg. So all those in favor?
Mr. Would you notice absentation by myself and those members who are not here?
Those not present abstain, and it's approved. Chair's report. We do have an ongoing conversation and discussion with regard to our meeting schedule for next year. Joe, would you like to reintroduce the issue for the board as you had done at the last meeting to talk about the pros and cons of the various ideas and thoughts we had presented at the last meeting? Thank you.
Yeah. My name's Joe Griffith. I'm the Director of Permitting and Land Use, and I guess the discussion last 2 weeks ago was whether or not the board should reduce its monthly meeting schedule to one meeting per month. And I think we've passed out 2 proposed schedules, one showing essentially similar to what you have now, providing 2 meetings every other Tuesday. And then the other alternative is that we could schedule 1 meeting a month with the provision that, I guess under special circumstances, if we had on that single meeting, a large agenda developing, that through some means we could call for another meeting on that 3rd Tuesday of the month, presumably. So I guess the discussion is, on the one hand, the 1 meeting per month with special provisions for calling a 2nd meeting, or continuing on with the 2 meetings per month, knowing that if we have a light agenda, i.e. a applicant for a single meeting, that applicant could be put off to the alternate meeting. The consideration is that with the single meeting, we could then use that 2nd Tuesday of the month to come together as subcommittees, both for the regulations subcommittee, and then also presumably be afforded more time as the Plan of Conservation and Development subcommittees are becoming more active and more involved in the various aspects of that report writing. So I think that kind of summarizes it pretty well, Jim.
That does. Thank you very much. And I would like to speak to that briefly. I do think that, our experience has been in the last, probably a year or so, is that we have pretty light meeting schedule. Tonight was, unique for the last 6 or 8 months in that there was a public hearing and there was, interest from the public. We do seem to have had meetings that were a half hour, 40 minutes, and it seems to bring the board out to take care of just a small amount of business is probably not the best use of time. I also think that as we step deeper and deeper into the plan of conservation and development, whether members are on the subcommittee or not, they would always be welcome to come and participate. And I think that effort is going to take more time, and it's not like just an hour before a scheduled meeting. It warrants more time. We'll have other stakeholders and presenters at that time. And I believe that as time goes on, if in fact we choose to have our schedule the same way we have it now with 2 meetings a month, then the POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development Subcommittee, would at one point need to be on a different night altogether. I don't think you come in for an hour and invite different stakeholders from the city to come in and listen, present, contribute in an hour where the members are now preparing for another meeting. So I advocate for a change, to have the first meeting of the month be a scheduled meeting the same as tonight, and then the second meeting of the month, the third Tuesday, would be set aside for subcommittee meetings, and primarily the Plan of Conservation and Development. But obviously, as it arises, the Regulations Subcommittee, they almost affect each other. But so anyway, that's what I would advocate for, and I would open the floor for anyone who wants to chime in. Mr. Moore.
This question is for staff in regards to the moratorium. In regards to the 830G, are there any in the pipeline that were scheduled prior to the moratorium that might cause calendar issues?
There is one that is in the pipeline that, for whatever reason, they're not moving forward quickly with providing information or asking to come before the board. It's smaller than the other ones that you've seen. At some point, I would anticipate them coming before the board. I don't know that that would really affect the schedule at all. Just one word of caution. Years ago, we had, and this is going back at least 12 years, we had a meeting that was used for subcommittees like the POCD, and which was fine. The catch with that meeting is it's the subcommittee of the board that's there. The full board can't be there. They can be, you can have people in the audience, but they can't participate, because if they do, it then becomes a formal board meeting, and that's why we got rid of it, because...
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's as long as we make those parameters clear, then I'm sure we'll make sure that we're within the law with in terms of a quorum. Yeah.
Right. So that
makes sense.
That's just the key thing. Other than that, whatever the board does, you do.
Anyone else like to weigh in? Mr. Sadie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shortly after my inability to make the meeting, I happened to actually see the meeting. I think it was that night. That's how quick it was. So I saw the conversations that all had, and asked to consider a couple of things that I think are important. We've all served, or most of us have served on other boards where we have had 2 meetings per month, similar to this. We don't know what the upcoming board's going to be. We have new members coming in. But when you know that there's going to be 2 meetings per month that you can attend as a board member and participate in, I think it's helpful for us. Doesn't mean that that's the only way to go, because I also understand fully your concern that we have minutes, 10-minute, 50-minute meetings with one thing. I am concerned about the issue of the planning and POCD meeting. I mean, that's the heavy lifting time. We understand the board has to get involved in that, and we're going to need more time. I'm just thinking that, is it realistic to assume that even having 2 meetings, that's going to be enough to meet our requirements? So we might have to meet 3 times a month if you had that. So the point is, I'm bringing up, when I was on the Board of Education 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we had our 2 meetings, plus we had the issue of closure of schools. Like, we were meeting many, many times a night. I just point that out. I have no problem whatever way everybody wants to go, but be mindful of everybody that might be traveling, not around, and they miss that one meeting, their voice is not heard. So as Mr. Sulkus said, if it's only for a subcommittee meeting, you may not be a member of the subcommittee, you cannot be heard.
I think the way that I envision a change to be is that at the first meeting of the month, if the meeting is in planning and pipeline, if it seems like it's going to be too much for one meeting, then at that point we notice the second meeting of the month is a regular meeting under the guise of a special meeting, but it's what we would consider a regular meeting. And then we would we would have some kind of a truncated POCD and regulations meeting on that random month where there seems to be too much for one meeting. Just seems to me, my experience is that we don't have a need for 2 meetings a month for the normal business flow. My experience in the last 3 years, and that as the POCD gets to be more intense, that we will need more time for that. So anyway, I think we can accommodate the public by allowing at any time, if someone feels that they are really harmed by waiting a whole month, then we would address that and try to accommodate the public. We want to make sure that we're accessible to the public. I don't want to try to limit that, but our experience has been, which is verifiable, that we have very little work in front of us on a month-to-month basis, historically, for the last couple of years, outside of 830G, which is now in moratorium. So that changes outside of one pipeline issue. And I would say that, we want the applicants to be prepared. We've seen many times where we get partial sets and not fully developed files in front of us. And if they have to wait a whole month, maybe they'll make sure that we have every I dotted and T crossed, and I think it's better for us as a board. Anyway, my personal opinion, and I would hear from Ms. Gator.
I'm just not quite sure what it is you're saying. You're saying changing it from 2 to 1, or you're going to keep it 2? It's all going to be controlled by the agenda for the second meeting, and you're going to have a quorum.
Yeah, I'll try to clarify that. So what we'll do is we'll have a general schedule that is the first Tuesday of the month will be a meeting like tonight. The second meeting, which would be the third Tuesday, would be basically set aside for subcommittees. If in fact, by the time the first meeting comes around, if there is too much on the plate for one meeting, then between staff and chair, we would say the second meeting of the month would be a meeting just like tonight. And we would have a truncated or shorter version of the subcommittee meetings. And we would call that a special meeting. But it would still be the same type of business we went through tonight, whether it's a public hearing or whether it's 3 or 4 CAM applications that didn't seem to be able to fit in on the first meeting of the month. And I guess we would have to have some kind of a criteria. If we think it's going to go past 11 o'clock, or potentially on the first meeting of the month, then staff and the chair could say, well, you know what, let's make sure that we accommodate the general public and have the second meeting be a quote-unquote regular meeting, maybe under the guise of, or the language of a special meeting. But the main schedule would be 1 meeting a month for public business and 1 meeting a month for subcommittees.
But it would still be two P and Z meetings. You're really not changing, it's just.
They would,
How do you set the
only those who volunteer for the subcommittees would be active members in the subcommittee meeting. Anyone can come and listen, but as a member of the public, so to speak, I think David has a legitimate concern is that if we have a quorum, then it becomes a regular meeting. And I'm not really sure how hard that is to just make happen. You know, whether we call it an open meeting and the only thing we put on the agenda is subcommittee business. You know, so that maybe should have been thought about ahead of time, but
I thought that's what we were going to find out before, because the idea of keeping it two, so you don't have to change anything, set it by the agenda, it'd be heavy on the first week of the month to handle the normal business, but I think you'd have to have a quorum for the second meeting, so.
well, if it's only subcommittees, you only need a majority of the members of the subcommittee to equal a quorum. Joe, would you come up and speak to the concept that we're running around with regarding how we frame the second meeting? If we just didn't change the schedule and just every second meeting, the agenda is only the subcommittees. I don't know. I mean, I'm getting lost in some details here. In order to achieve the concept of one
board meeting,
one what I'll call a normal meeting and one subcommittee meeting, what prevents us from just leaving it the way it is, but as a internal housekeeping thing, only put subcommittee business on the second meeting, unless there's an overflow, so to speak.
One other thing too, it could be a good way to check out how it works. So if after a year of doing that, you see that the second meeting is never needed, and we could kind of like look back and say, okay, maybe one meeting a month for the P&Z, but I hate to see us jumping around back and forth, finding out we made a mistake.
That's a quick question. I think we should just hold it just the one meeting. I think we have to make an announcement to the public. We're going to have two meetings, and that second meeting is going to be just a non-quorum meeting or anything like that. But I would like to speak to just one meeting.
Thank you. Do you think you could clarify what Mr. Cater's concern is, or?
I'm not sure I understand it, but if I understand, on this second meeting on the third Tuesday of the month, we're talking about back-to-back, essentially having subcommittee meetings. The first one being the regulation subcommittee, right? And then allowing you then to convene at whatever time, 6:30 or 7 o'clock for the Plan of Conservation and Development subcommittee, and allowing that to go as long as it needs to. And your concern is that you're developing agendas for each, right? And publishing those agendas as open meetings?
I mean, we're kind of, I'm not sure. I think that the original conversation was changing the schedule, then kind of a hybrid was a question, whether we just don't change the schedule, but internally just notice the second meeting as a subcommittee meeting only. And whether we have a quorum or not, it still is a meeting. I'm trying to address David's concern about a quorum on the second meeting.
I think, Dave, you say you're concerned, but I think it has to do with having more than just the subcommittee present.
Yeah, we can have this second meeting set up as a subcommittee meeting. That's perfectly fine, as long as the agenda says that it's the subcommittee meeting.
Okay,
and as long as we have just the subcommittee people there. Now, if we have that first meeting of the month and it's like, oh gee, we have these items now that we really want to carry over into that second meeting, then we would change the notice that we would have sent to the city clerk and turn that subcommittee meeting into a special meeting where the full board then can participate.
I got you. Okay, so that makes sense. Is everybody on board with that concept anyway? All right, then.
So that means you don't change it. You're going to keep it 2, but just
No,
by the
it-
agenda. You're going to keep it 2
No,
meetings?
it means that we're going to have meeting 1 be a regular meeting like this.
No, I
Number
understand
2,
that, but-
subcommittee meeting, and then if we need to address public concerns outside of the subcommittees, then we will notice it for a special meeting, and then it would be a full meeting like tonight, if in fact there's too much stuff on for 1 meeting.
I just like to say that this board is here to serve the constituents of our districts. So you got to keep that in mind. Special meetings or subcommittees are volunteer for the people on the board who want to put in extra time to work on things. To me, you should keep the 2 meetings a month. If for some reason there's not enough for a second meeting, then basically it just get canceled out and subcommittee people can come in and go during that time. But other than that, I personally, I think you should not take and make somebody wait on their application just because you're going to have 1 meeting a month.
Thank you. Yes, please.
To John's point, I was just thinking this scenario through. If I'm an applicant and I'm coming into the DPLU office, let's say the first of the month, and presumably not on the agenda for the first meeting of the month, fine, I'm going to wait for another 30 days to get onto that agenda. Now, as that agenda starts filling up, though, it's not like you're going to call a meeting earlier. You're going to call a second meeting 6 weeks later now. So, I mean, what you're doing is, in fact, as you're saying, okay, let's accommodate the applicants, and as the agenda starts filling up, you're actually going to be pushing them out further. And that would be a concern.
So, so what is the time in queue in normal? You have somebody come in, is it 3 months before they get in front of us, or is it 3 days? Somebody comes in with a file and they want to come in front of us. What is that lead time?
That's the ongoing discussions that Dave and I have constantly.
Yeah,
We are trying to minimize that.
Let's just give us an order of magnitude. It's not 3 days.
No. Of
Right,
course not.
so
And
6 weeks, so if they're not ready for, to get on the first week, what's the likelihood that they've already been waiting for a certain amount of weeks or months in preparation, in plan review, and whatever it is?
Your typical CAM application, which are those are your
That's the
basic
simplest thing that we have.
Simplest things that we have. I'm going to say, Dave, you can jump in if I'm misspeaking, but it's probably about 2 weeks. Is that accurate?
2 to 3 weeks, yeah. And then the only twist to that is if it's a CAM application that requires a special permit.
Right.
Because then we have to build in, you say it's 2 to 3 weeks,
right.
The normal process that you would normally come to you, then we have to build in the advertising period.
But your basic CAM application are the things, and frankly, are the most common applications that we're getting. Those are the things that we're trying to move through the system quickly, get them a building permit.
Okay, Mr. Sadie.
Thanks, Mr. Quish. Isn't it really just a simple question that we have to reserve a specific space in the city building on a specific date so that people know it's going to be open? Isn't that what we're really setting for the calendar? Then it's up to the chair, along with the staff, to set the agenda that's appropriate. Isn't that how we normally work them?
We have to let the city clerk know by the 1st of December. So it's, what's the board doing? What kind of meeting is it going to be? And then, yes, you're right about those things. That notice goes out then to the city, to Public Works, who's in charge of the buildings for scheduling. But all boards and commissions are required to file with the city clerk the schedule for the upcoming year. So, I mean, we could. I mean, it sounds like we're having 2 meetings. The question is just, what's that second meeting going to be called? And do we have to declare it one way or the other? I don't know the answer to that question, other than for meetings we have to file our agendas. So if it happens that the second meeting of the month is always just agendas for subcommittees, that may suffice. You know, I'd have to, I'm not sure.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. What's the possibilities of starting the meetings at 7 instead of 7:30? I don't know, just if that would make, I don't know if that's more of a...
That's up to you. The board, you can set your time. You know, I'll show up no matter what. You tell me, but yeah,
I don't know how it
different.
would affect the board, you know, the members on the board to start a half hour earlier. Then at your second meeting, if it's a light meeting, you have your board meeting, and then it would give enough time afterwards for the subcommittees to meet if they wanted to meet on that particular day.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Do we have to decide tonight, David, or can we?
Well, unless you want to have a special meeting between now and the 1st of December.
Oh, 1st of December, okay, yeah. All right, well, we could flip a coin. I would make a motion that we change up the schedule and have the first of our 2 monthly meetings be what I will call a regular meeting like we had tonight, and the second meeting of the month be a meeting of the subcommittees, and that in the case that staff feels that there's any burden to anyone in the public, in consultation with the chair, that we open the second meeting up to a quote-unquote regular meeting and accommodate the subcommittees with a lesser time slot. And so there's a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I had a quick question. Why wouldn't we just start this off at the beginning of the year instead of December?
Because we have to notify by the December 1st to the, we have to send notice to the city clerk by December 1st so they can publish the next year's.
Well,
we have to do it we have to do it this meeting so that we can notice the city clerk before December 1st. That's a statute or something.
the notification, but to start the process.
Yeah, we can start
January.
we can start the process January 1st. I think that's a good point.
The 7 o'clock, are you considering that at all? A couple of people?
We can go to 7. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Mr. Grant. Well, let me change my motion to have both meetings start at 7 as opposed to 7:30 as they are now. Was your second still good? Second is still good. Peg, did you have anything to add? Oh, no. All those in favor? Aye.
Can we have a roll call vote, please, for this?
From the left?
In favor.
In favor.
I'll abstain since I'm not going to be here next year.
In favor.
Well, even though I won't be, I'll still vote in favor. It seems to make sense.
Same with me. I'm in favor.
In favor?
In favor.
In favor.
And I'm also in favor with no dissension. The motion passes. So that was Chair's report, staff report.
Nothing this evening.
Not this evening. So then a motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you.